That was insanely fast. And if you're looking to get faster at the piano and develop your finger speed, then stay tuned because this video is just for you. In this video, I'm going to share with you 5 awesome techniques to start speeding up your piano speed right now. Whether you're advanced or you're just getting started and you're a beginner, these techniques really do work and you'll start to develop the finger speed that you've always wanted when playing the piano. By the way, it's Josh with Piano Frenzy, and if you're new to the channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any videos. All right, let's get into it. Let's start developing that finger speed. Here's the first exercise. So for this exercise, I like to do the group of seconds. It's really easy because what you're gonna do is just use fingers 1, 2, and 3, and simply you're gonna start on C, and you're gonna play 3 notes. Transition to hand up, do 3 notes. Transition up, and do another 3 notes, and etc. So an important element of this exercise is making sure that 1, you have a fluid wrist as you move up between the keys, so there's a little rotation that happens there. So the wrist is loose, but there's rotation with it. And 2, you have a bit of an accent on your thumb every time you play. So for example, anytime I move up, I make sure that I slide a bit with a rotation, drop the thumb, rotate, drop the thumb, etc. So when you're first doing this, it's important that you exaggerate all of these movements I'm talking about. For example, really exaggerate that wrist and that accent. On the way down, it's a similar sort of thing, but your rotation is going to go the other way. So you're going to kind of go like this with your 3rd finger. And your rotation is just the opposite way now. And I'm holding my hand here so you can see how I'm rotating. So when you start adding speed to this exercise, a couple things have to change. 1, you want to bring your volume down a little bit because it does take more energy to be loud, and therefore that's actually going to slow you down. You want to play these kind of lightly. 2, you want to take some of that accent off of your thumb, so you end up sounding like this. It has more of a playful sound to it, more of like a thinner texture to it rather than, that's not what you want to do. That's actually really just going to make you sluggish and slow you down. So what I encourage you to do is to use a metronome because that's a firm metric that we can use. That's something that's tangible. Add 2 to 5 clicks to your metronome. So maybe start the exercise at 60 beats per minute and then maybe go to 62, then 64 and so forth until you get to the desired speed. So when I'm working with a metronome, I like to chunk these. So I'll do this in like maybe 2 groups like this, and then that'll be it. Then I'll add 2 more groups to it and see how I do. Then I'll add more until I get to the top. I find that if you have larger hands, it's important that you have a bit of a cuff to it like this. You have a bit of a steepness to your hands and don't go too flat, because if you go too flat, you might actually hit more keys than you want and it'll be a little more sluggish. So I like to make sure I have a nice little curve to my hands, especially on the way down. One last detail, it's important to note your hand won't do the same sort of exaggerated motions once you start adding speed. Those big motions like that start looking really small like this. I still have the rotation, it's just very small. So as you can see, playing groups of seconds really does work, especially when you start working in that wrist fluidity, and you'll start to get a lot quicker if you do this exercise every single day. All right, next up, we're gonna talk about something everyone talks about, which are scales, but I'm gonna talk about it in a much different way to show you how you can use it to develop speed right away. Here's how we do that. So we all know how to play 1 octave scales, right? 3 notes up, and then another 5 notes. And we always have what we call the tuck of the thumb tucking under. What I don't see in a lot of training is how you're supposed to tuck the thumb under and how you're supposed to make that a quick movement. So when you do the tuck, it's important that your thumb immediately slides under. That way when you press your thumb, the rest of the hand shoots over too. I'll show you again. So it's 1, 2, 3. That's a quick tuck, and then I like to call them windows, right? There's one half where your hand looks like this. There's a part where your hand looks like this. And then the last part where your hand looks like this. So even if you're playing your scale at a slow speed, you can still do the motions very quickly. For example, if I went really slow, see how quick my thumb went, even though my overall tempo is slow. And then the next move, still fast. Now, if you're new to scales, I might encourage you actually to do your scales going in descending motion first if you're using your right hand. The reason is because you can play the first 5 notes very quickly and then you only have 1 shift you have to worry about versus you have to make your shift after 3 notes. For example, I would do this. Again. Your left hand, the same logic. For your left hand, I would actually go up first since it's 5 keys. Shift, and then one more time. Shift it, and then up. And then you can do the tuck under. So when you're practicing your 1-octave scales, you don't have to do them all at once like so. You can have pauses in between at the different window points to make sure you're getting all your transitions to happen very quickly. So when you practice your 1-octave scales, do it that way rather than just jumping into it or even jumping in hands together. I wouldn't even encourage you to do that either. Another way you can work on the transition of tucking the thumb under, crossing over, is simply to play your scales in contrary motion. I have talked about that a lot on this channel. For this version, I actually start with my pinkies, go 5 in, stop, make my shift, and then until I'm on the same C. Then you can go back out. Stop, stop again, and then when you're comfortable, the whole thing. By practicing in these small windows, making sure that the moves are quick, even if the scale is slow, you'll be able to slowly add some speed to this stuff, and eventually your scales will sound like this. So if you're diligent about how you practice slowly, make sure you work on all the transitions and the shifts, your scales will eventually be able to go quickly like this. And that's regardless of which hand you use, right? Again, just a note, you don't need to play your scales very loudly at all. Actually, the more sound you add, the slower you're probably gonna go. So try to keep them light. Don't go piano in volume, but do try to keep them light. The goal is you wanna make sure that you're very even with your scales, so I encourage very slow practice at first when you're doing these. Work on the transitions. Go ahead and pause at those points. Make sure your hand is making the shifts, and then these scales are gonna go really fast for you once you start adding some speed with the metronome. So moving on from scales, now we have what I like to call octave leaps. This is really technical, but I think you're gonna enjoy the exercise. Let's try it out. So we all know about octaves, and I see it talked about a little bit, mostly as a unit as such as this. But we never talk about how to break them apart and add speed like so. Now, there is a technique to make sure that I can do those quick, and it's simply by leaping to my octaves. So here's how I would do it. I'll start my thumb on the C, shift up, D, shift up, E, shift up, F, shift up. Notice every time I shifted up, it was a quick jerk to the new position. A quick jerk to the new position. And yes, I may have larger hands that can sit an octave already, but if you have smaller hands, this works too. For example, you just keep your hand closed, play the C, shift up, play the D, shift up, play the E, shift up. This also works on the way down as well. Shift down, then B, shift down, then A, shift down, then G, shift down. So similar to the 1-octave scale, the quicker you can make your shifts as you're playing at a slower tempo, when you want to add speed to it and get things really fast, you'll have a much more accuracy and you'll actually be able to do it a lot quicker. So our final result ends up being this. And yes, of course, you're gonna have a little bit of flexibility and shifting in your wrist as well. It's gonna be very flexible, and that's necessary in order to make those quick shifts. It may not look as big as when you're doing it slow, but you'll still have those little small subtle movements in there. So we all know about chords and triads in particular, right? Fingers 1, 3, and 5. But what I find is it's really helpful when you're trying to develop some speed in your hands if you break them apart and try to ascend the piano and descend the piano. So here's an example of that. You can even do it hands together. So here's the trick. It's all about the wrist movement. It's all about that rotation. Very similar to the exercise I talked about earlier. So here's an example. Slowly. Add a little accent to the first note every time. Keep that rotation. Keep that rotation. Get to the top. Reverse your rotation movement. Right? We're going reverse now, right? Something you might have noticed is as I rotated, I did a slight shift to the next note I was gonna need. So for example, I did C, E, G. Notice my thumb is kind of hovering over the D now, so I can just simply drop. Hovering over the E, and I can drop. The problem is if you don't do that rotation, what happens is you're probably not gonna be prepared to play the next note, and you're gonna have some tenseness in your wrist. For example, if my wrist had no rotation, it would be this. But look, I'm not positioned to go to the D. I have to do a quick shift, And that's very hard to do and not something you want to do. So make sure you always have some rotation. It helps in several ways. One, it releases tension. Two, it prepositions you to the next spot you need to be in. When you're aiming to put these together, you have to understand that your fingering is going to be backwards. Yes, your third finger will line up, but your first and your fifth fingers will be mirror images of each other. So it's important that you line up through sound, using your ear on those accents. And etc. And you can take your rotations the same way, for example, going down. Now the accents are on the right sides of my hands. So how do we develop speed? Well, you can use a metronome, which I always recommend when you're just doing technical exercises. But you just add a little bit of speed and you do this in small chunks. See how much you can handle. So you'll maybe just do this and stop. Then add some more. Then add some more. And etc. So the next exercise that we're going to try is called the wiggle. I really love this one because it's a quick way to start moving the hands and getting that wrist moving. So I'll show you exactly how it goes. So this next method I like to call the wiggle intervals. I've spoken about it before, but it's really effective. It's just simply a 5-finger position, right? You can start anywhere, but I like to start on C. And basically you'll use your thumb, your fifth, your thumb, your fourth, thumb on your third, thumb on your second. And then you'll shift up a second on the piano. So here's how it goes. So when you first do this the first time, you start adding speed, it's going to feel very uncomfortable because it's a lot of wiggling and you have to keep going back to your thumb. But that's not the only way you can do it. You can also start with your pinky and go the other way. For example, pinky to your thumb is still a fifth, pinky to 2 is a fourth, pinky to 3 is a third, pinky to 4 is a second. So you can do it the opposite way. Here's an example of that. And then up. Then up. When you get really comfortable, you can start trying to go really fast. And this is a hard one, I know, but it's a great one to develop your speed. So here's an example of going like insanely fast with it. And last but not least, the one that I'm most excited about, the one I use in almost every sort of training every single day, arpeggios, the 4-note arpeggio. So I'll show you how you can use that to add speed to your fingers. So for this example, one of my favorites is the broken arpeggio, more specifically the 4-note broken arpeggio. I like using this because it's a nice way to get your fingers playing different intervals than they normally would. For example, you're going to use fingers 1, 2, 3, and 5 here to play your thirds to start the scale. And then of course, you're going to go up a second every time. Look at that wrist movement that gets formed. And then more. So you want to start adding speed to it, it gets really fun. Left hand can do as well, same fingering, right? The trick with getting speed on any of these is all in the wrist. You want to feel very relaxed and not tense. If you tried to do this scale like this, you hear my sounds tight, none of this is moving, and I can't even go fast. But once I start releasing my wrist, adding those rotations in, a little bit of accent on my thumb every time, right, to help me keep my beat. Or almost, if not the accent, you can add just a bit of a staccato to that first beat. And then everything starts going really fast there. So of all the exercises I have here for developing speed, that is probably my favorite one and one I encourage you to try right now. And there you have it. Those are exercises that you can do right now, even as a beginner pianist, to start developing finger speed and dexterity right away. So there are a couple things I want you to keep in mind as you do these exercises. First, make sure you practice all of these slowly at first. There's no sense playing these exercises dirty or muddy or with incorrect fingering and making tons of mistakes. Go slowly, know what you want to play, know the notes you need, and know the techniques you want to work on. Moving on, there's the technique itself that you need to also focus on. All these exercises focus on fluid wrist movement and rotation. Make sure you work that slowly so you know exactly what you need every single time. And last but not least, it's not the worst thing in the world, but use a metronome every now and then. Make sure that you can use it to verify your speed, and when you want to start inching things up, you'll have something solid that you can rely on, something that you can point to check your speed. You can also keep a log of your metronome speeds every day and see how fast you've gotten from where you started. It's a great way to encourage yourself and see your progress. All right, so I hope all these exercises help you. Try them out and let me know what you think. Just drop a comment and tell me how it's working for you. All right, with that said, I'll see you in the next video, but before you go, make sure you check these 2 videos out.